Hi, Ben. Thank you so much for joining me for this one on one extended conversation. It was such an honor to feature you, Natalia Milstein, and Katie Swatlin for this week's Symposium premiere. And this is just an opportunity for me to ask you some questions about why you chose to work with this piece from Katie's Elements collection and your compositional process, and really anything else you'd like to share about the process this week. So, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
So I would like to start by just asking, like, why you were drawn to Katie Swatlin's work, or number four from her Elements collection.
Yeah. Uh, I was very struck by the piece when I first saw it. Um, Primarily, actually, because of the materials and the process that she used. When I saw it and then read a little bit about it, the first thing I saw, kind of instinctively, was this beautiful copper color of the background, which is the basic texture that she has worked with. And it immediately reminded me of the copper piano strings. The low strings on a piano are made of copper to add a little bit of weight. That's how they make them deeper, of course. Uh, and that color and the way that you could see how she had worked on that surface just immediately spoke to me as the idea of working on these strings on the piano. Um, and the fact that you could see the very physical processes by which she had created the work itself, the fact you could see the scratches and you could see the discoloration of the heat, it really made the whole thing quite vivid to me. I found it quite a vivid kind of physical experience to look at it and feel. I got a strong feeling from the artwork, right? Which I felt like I could kind of channel into a feeling of making music. Nothing too specific one into the other, but I wanted to sort of recreate the artwork in music.
Thank you for sharing that. And I was really struck by, in your introduction to the premiere, you speak about how the act of listening to it is partaking in the creative process. Can you expand on that and how that informed the sort of compositional process for you and sort of bringing this all together?
Hmm. Yeah, I wanted the idea that this piece um, was not sort of a static comment on something that already existed. It wasn't a case that the artwork is there, finished, done, and you look at it and sort of have a response. I didn't want it to be that sort of undynamic situation. Um, I liked much more the idea that you had some sort of dialogue with the work itself and with the process that was creating it. So when I was writing the piece, I wrote it much more in the sense that listening to the piece, or as I was writing the piece, was recreating the artwork itself. And so then when you listen to the piece yourself, you are actually experiencing the creation of the artwork, but just through a different medium. It's not a visual thing anymore. It's an oral and a sonic thing. But just by listening to it, I liked the idea that you are kind of partaking in the creative process of both works of art now sort of existing simultaneously, and one is now sort of a regeneration of the other whenever it's performed. I wanted them to sort of coexist together rather than be kind of two separate things that had a kind of arbitrary static relationship.
And I think that comes across really beautifully just in the way that the premiere juxtaposes sort of Katie's work and your introduction, and also the way that the video of the performance overlays the pieces, the artwork, which actually you requested. And that's not a request I've received before. I usually do that on my own because that's what this project is about. So I found that really interesting that you specifically requested that we edit over the video with as much of Katie's work as possible. Um, and that was really nice to see, actually, like as I was editing this video and bringing it together, just how the music and how the gestural components of you hitting the low strings in the piano and this copper background and sort of seeing the process
Mm.
um, really comes together quite beautifully. And I just going off of that, I wanted to ask if you've worked with art in or visual art in this way as a composer before, or if this is a new thing for you.
It's totally new. It's I've never had also such a kind of specific brief to take a specific work of it. Because usually when you write music or do anything creative, you can I think also from talking to friends about it, I mean, you're never completely sure where inspiration comes from. And sometimes you're experiencing things and it's going into your mind, and it's never such a direct path. Then you find you have ideas, and actually, often only after the ideas have come out and you've worked them out, do you then realize what they were inspired by. That's more often than not the compositional process, at least among composers that I know, is you don't actually know where a lot of your ideas are from. You don't actually know a lot of what your pieces are going to turn out to be. And it's only when they're sort of finished, you retrospectively look back on them, and then they might all make sense with respect to things that you've read or seen or thought about or heard. There's this kind of reverse logic that goes on. So in this case, it was a completely different experience because you're very much given a brief, right? It's much more like working with other mediums in terms of song is the thing that it most reminded me of when you have a text, which you then immediately respond to, which I have written a bit of, or anything like ballets or opera where you have some sort of response to something that already exists, which is not the case when you write sort of just abstract instrumental music.
Well, I'm so glad that we were able to inspire this to happen. And another thing I wanted to point out is you're in Berlin, correct?
Yeah.
So Katie is on the East Coast. I'm in California, and your pianist Natalia Milstein also in Berlin.
Yeah.
So this is like a really nice sort of international collaboration. I think it comes together really beautifully, and I love the idea of you all sort of um, contributing perspectives based on this exhibit that comes from one location, and we're all in different locations. So
Yeah.
thank you for being part of this, and I'm sad that Katie couldn't join us today, but yeah, she was really thrilled about the piece and being a part of it and the way that you made it into something that honored her work. So thank
Mm.
you. And um, so I guess my last question is just about the title, Etching's Triptych. That's the title of the piece,
Mhm.
right? Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about why you chose to call it that?
Well, yes. Titles are funny things because they often come at the ends of writing pieces, and they're often part of this sort of uh, uh, post production kind of contemplation of the work that you've created. Right, they're part of this whole process of thinking about where the inspirations came from and seeing relations that you didn't see before. Um, Katie, of course, split up her work into three panels, which I would like to have got the chance to ask her why, because it looks like it was one piece of metal originally. So I wonder why she split them up into three. I think it's quite effective the way she did it. I just wonder why that thought came to her. A triptych, of course, has these kind of pseudo clerical associations in that a triptych was kind of like the altar pieces that comprised three panels, one big central panel with the most important religious scene above the altar, and two panels out the side, which kind of related to it or commented to it on it. So there's quite a basic there's a basic descriptive element there, is that her work is in three panels, my piece is sort of in three movements, and the triptych element is one of sort of uh, the idea of it being three panels that sort of tell some sort of figurative story. And in my case, the figurative story is the creation of the work itself. So it's sort of a self-referential triptych in that way. And etchings, from the from the feeling that was the most kind of tactile part that I got from it. The actual the scratching and manipulating of the material. I got the feeling that it wasn't a kind of like drawing, or it wasn't a kind of writing, or it was, that I was actually kind of sort of engraving or marking these things onto the background, whatever it was. So etchings was just something that's a little bit more rough than these other ideas of kind of sketches or paintings or other ways that people describe these things. So that's sort of how the idea of a triptych of etchings came about.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I think that fits with this symposium premiere very beautifully. Is there anything else you'd like to add that I haven't touched on yet?
I can think of one thing which some people might find interesting, or certainly is something that I'm quite surprised by. Is my compositional process is one that goes by sort of repeated improvisation and reanalysis, and improvisation and reanalysis again. Actually, I don't really sit down and write notes one after the other and really spending all the time thinking about what note comes after the next one. It'll be a kind of free improvisation that gets progressively more solidified. It's almost much more like making pottery, when you start with something very fluid and very liquid and you shape it or form it and it gradually hardens into some solid shape. That's how it feels. But the important thing about it is it's a very recursive process. You improvise, you do something, I record it, I listen to it, I dictate it, I then analyze it. If there's a part that works very well, then I analyze it and I look at it and I say, well, which notes did I use and why did that work well? And then I use that to generate further improvisations. But that means that you're kind of also in a dialogue with the work itself. So it's quite an important point that I didn't know how it was going to turn out. Lots of composers don't know how their work is going to turn out when they start. But it's kind of in the spirit of the piece as well. The way that I wrote it was a continuously discursive creative process in terms of trying something, listening to it back, analyzing it, and doing again, and gradually the whole thing sort of grows like that. But it's a compositional process that I've come to quite recently, and it goes kind of against my very sort of, people like to say, analytic and rational background. Because I like to think that I had to go to the other extreme in order to come to some sort of midpoint. So I find that nice.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's really interesting. Just in the conversations that I've had with visual artists through this whole process of having this symposium, that sounds like kind of the process for quite a few visual artists who have been on the symposium. They don't have a clear
Mm,
image of how it's going to turn out. It's about trying something, molding, reflecting, going back to it. And so this like eternal sort of shaping process,
yeah.
and very spontaneous. And um, one of the reasons for the symposium is to shed a light on process just in all of these
Mm.
different fields. So thank you so much for sharing and for contributing and for the wonderful performance and composition. And I can't wait to share this with our audiences.
Yeah, no, thank you for doing it. It's a great idea, and it's had
Thank you.
such a wide scope that I'm very happy to be a part of it. It was a very stimulating experience.
Well, I'm so glad. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.